decide if I look slightly less ridiculous with the mask. This stupid thing. It's really pretty much a wash. Theoretically, I'm supposed to stay 6 feet away from all of it at all times, even when I have the face shield on. But at least theoretically, you can see my face, which may or may not prove to be useful, depending on how you look at my face. All right. This is World Civilization 1500. If that's not the course you were here for, you're free to leave at any moment. Now would be good. And today, what the plan is simple. I first want to simply go over the syllabus, get some idea of what you can expect from me, what you can expect from the course, what I want from you, and after that, I will at the end talk a little bit about why we should be studying history in the first place. Why, rather than just the nuts and bolts, the rationale of why you should be here in the first place. But first things first, you are going to hear me speaking a lot, and there's no way around that. But before we do that, I did want to at least go around the room and get all of your names. First of all, because I always do this, and it's helpful to me to begin to know your names. Secondly, though, I also want to take attendance because of the secret agenda here. So if you could just give me your name, if you go around the room, I'd appreciate that. In the past, I used to ask people why they had signed up for this course, but to be perfectly frank, the answers were so depressing that I really stopped asking that question. But if there is some particular reason beyond that it fulfills certain gen requirements that you took this course, feel free to say that, but or make up something that sounds inspiring. But please, first and last name, and loud as possible. I know that all of you are hindered by the fact that you have these silly masks on. There's no other way about it. But try to keep your voices up as much as possible. Please.
I'm Hannah Brown.
Hannah Brown. Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Margaret Schoening. I go by Maggie, though.
Good, that's helpful. Thank you. Very good. Please.
Haley Evelyn.
Gotcha. Thank you. Please.
Julie Horton.
Gotcha. Please.
Juliana Hollahan.
Okay, very good. Right here. Please.
Erin Dulac.
Thank you. Here.
I'm Emerson Lake.
Gotcha. Awesome.
Lucy Vanderpool.
Lucy Vanderpool. Very good. Please.
Peter Jenke.
Peter Jenke. Okay. Thank you. Please.
Aretha Vitalino.
Okay, very good. Gotcha. Please.
Colby Madden.
Very good. Please.
Grayson Howell.
Grayson Howell. Okay. All right. Please.
Michael Hahn.
Please.
Malachi Johnson.
Very good. Thank you. And let's just wait till this is done.
Kimberly Nelson.
Please.
Twyla Carascola.
Please.
Elizabeth Wolfing. I go by Liz.
Thank you. Please. Please.
Pete Cadena.
Gotcha. Okay. Please.
Josh Johansson. I go by JJ.
I got you. Very good. Thank you. Please.
Giovanni Burke. I go by Gio.
Great. Please.
Isabel Barrios.
Please.
Bernadette Flynn.
Please.
Colette Breda.
Say it one more time.
Colette Breda.
Got it. Very good. Sorry. I realize that this math says these math do disadvantage those who speak low. Please, I know you can say.
William Reitmeyer. Billy.
And please.
Anastasia Wood.
You are the last one up, though. What, if you just give me your name, please?
Oh.
Sorry, you're actually the last one in the class. Go ahead.
Sarah Cooney.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Have I gotten everyone here? And does everyone have a syllabus? Good. Okay. First things first. Thank you. You will see the syllabus is a very useful piece to have with you. Obviously, this is the only day we're going to explicitly talk about it, but it is useful to have the entire semester, so don't throw it out. If you do throw it out, however, on the Blackboard side of the class, you will find a copy of the syllabus. I think what all of you will find is that as much as possible, I'm fairly anal, and I wish to keep to my syllabus. In part, that's just because my nature is such. The other reason, and the reason that is really much more content-driven, is that this course we have a huge amount of material to cover. I've joked in the past that if I cough, we lose 100 years of a civilization. So what that really means is that I have tried my best to just slot in a whole lot of civilizations, a whole lot of history in a very short period of time. And so it is very important that I stick to the schedule. So as much as humanly possible, I'm going to try to do so. Now, as we proved last semester, the best laid plans often do not go as planned. So if anything of that nature happens again, I will deal with it. But if it does not, I really do want to keep to my schedule because there's too much here for me to play around with too much. Make sense? All right. On the first page there, you'll see, I'm not going to go through every single blow by blow of the syllabus because it will really be excruciatingly dull for me and also for you. But I do want to get into some of the highlights and then afterwards give you the opportunity in case you have questions. Because it is important that we go over them now. My name, first of all, I'm Dr. John Romano. You can see all of the important information right there on the first page. My name, my office, I'm in St. Ben's, room 315. And you'll notice if you go to St. Ben's, my office, for reasons that you need not be concerned about that much, but they never actually gave me a plaque to say the number of the office. All the other offices in St. Ben's have it. This used to annoy me, but I kind of like it now because it's unique. What this means, however, if you're searching for my office, you'll just have to figure it out. It follows logically in a numerical sequence until you get to my office, in which case the number disappears. But the other way to find it is that there's a huge Rome map, a map of the city of Rome. That's on either side of the door. So if you found that, my last name is Romano, you don't even know where it was. That's another way to find it. I give you here my office phone number. That's really just for my own amusement. No one ever calls it. So if you really were so compelled, you can call my office number. It's rarely, if ever, happened, but it's there. Really, in some ways, what I recommend is using email. I really try, especially over the course of the semester, to be very good about getting back to email. I know that, especially when it comes, to an exam or comes to presentations, you may have a question that needs to be answered quickly. And that by far is the easiest way to do it. So if you do have a question, that's really how I would push you to get in touch with me. As I said, I really do try my best to get back to people quickly, especially if, of course, it's a problem. There also are my office hours. I will meet you at other times if you get in touch with me, just to make sure I'm there ahead of time. But these hours are hours that are there for you if you have questions, concerns. I'll tell you frankly that very often people don't use them, either because they're so satisfied that they don't want to come, or for whatever reason. But they're there. So take advantage of them if you do have questions. I am serious when I tell you that I would much rather have you come to me with a problem early in the semester than allow it to fester to the point where there's absolutely no hope of correcting problems later on. It's better to come see me, right? And of course, that also we go when we start to have evaluations or quizzes or tests. I do take time to write comments on quizzes and tests, but that doesn't always mean necessarily that well, I've convinced you that I was right. But more importantly, that you may still have questions about how you can do better in the future. If that's the case, then come see me. It really is better for you to clear the air immediately. All right. I am not going to read my own description, which is a little bit self-referential. It is fair to say that this course, in brief, covers a lot of time and a lot of geography. It is meant to introduce you, in essence, to the world before the year 1500, which really is, in some ways, an absolutely enormous slice. In terms of the number of civilizations we'll cover, in terms of the amount of time, in terms of the lived human experience. And I don't pretend otherwise. This course is meant to be a survey. I don't necessarily think that's a bad word, though. I do think that a survey of this kind could be kind of like a buffet, in which you get to taste many different things in a small amount that you may not necessarily be able to have a full meal of any one particular civilization or any one particular area. But I do think that is a good thing because it exposes you to a lot of what's out there. What are these civilizations that existed in the past? Of course, your journey in history need not end with this class if you do get interested by one of these civilizations. We do have more focused classes. Of course, you just go out and read on your own. So this is meant to introduce you to many things at once. But, as I said, does not have to be the end of your experience in history. I hope it won't be. The one thing I do say here, it's very clear, is that the nature of the beast of this kind of class, the number of people we have in here, and even more so now that you're all enmasked, the format of the class is normally lecture. That does not mean, however, that I'm going to just be speaking continuously and ignore all of you. That's more like the online experience you had last semester. I do hope here that if there are things that you don't understand, you may certainly raise your hand, ask me to clarify something. I'm more than happy to field those kind of questions. Or, of course, if you don't want to be in the class, at another time. You'll also see here on the top of the lectures, I will also be asking everyone in class to do 2 presentations, group presentations. And this is not just a method to torture you. I'm supposed to say it was not a method to torture you at all. It is because I think it is important as a skill to be able to read something, to learn about it, and then to turn around and to be able to help other people to learn about it as well. So you are actually doing some of the work as well. So it's not just every session is not going to be simply lecture. I'm not going to go through all the goals of the course to say more or less what I said in terms of content. I do hope, though, I'm really quite aware of the fact that for many of you, this may be the only history course you take, and that is perfectly fine. But at the end of the day, I want to see that you will have some understanding of what it is that a historian does, what my job is, what other historians' job is, to understand this discipline as well. So the goal is not simply just to communicate information. It's also to communicate how, especially historians of the ancient and medieval world, do their work. And as most of you already know, this hits 3 agendas all at once. Page 2. You probably already know this is a virtual bookstore. If you have not purchased these books yet, these are the 2 books I'm asking you to purchase: The Sources of World Societies and World of History. In the past, I used to use a textbook, but really everyone hated it and it was really very expensive. So I got rid of the textbook because I felt it was not really serving any purpose. I'm not getting rid of these 2, though, because they do serve a purpose. And really what these books do, and really I think they do quite well, is to expose you to some of the words of the men and women who come from the past. So it's not just a matter then of, it's not a question of just learning names or dates. You're also learning about what are some of those sources that historians read, how do they read them. You learn to make sense of the past by reading these sources. So the reading is really not extremely burdensome to my, just in terms of the number of pages I'll have to read, but I do expect you to do it. And it really does help more than to supplement, but really to fill out these periods that we're studying, to learn more about them. So get the books if you don't have them already, read them. You'll notice too also, in addition to those books, those I asked you to purchase, there are also 10 texts that you will discover on the Blackboard site for the class. Most of them complete texts, in some cases excerpts. And these are PDFs that you can download. You can download them immediately, they're there for you. And these are the texts that you're going to be using for presentations. In particular, the presentation groups will read these in detail. But as I said, you can all just download them immediately. They're there for you. And you'll see later on that in the schedule. The one note I have that I always ask this question is when should I do the reading? And under any given day on my schedule, I really anticipate that you will have done the reading before you come to class. The reason for that is I think it helps you to understand more what we're talking about in the lecture. I think it makes you more receptive, more or less, to what we're doing in lecture. I should also say that the question that usually is unasked, but people think it, is that do I have any way to prove that you've done the reading every day? And the answer is no. I mean, eventually I will give you quizzes and tests, but on a day-to-day basis, it's really up to you. And you're adults, I assume you want to learn, so you have to keep track of your own reading for the most part. And I find that people who tend to keep up with the reading do a little bit better on exams than people who just try to cram it at the last minute. All right. Attendance policy, especially this semester, attendance is probably a little bit wacky in a certain sense, in that you can basically miss as much as you want because we do not want people coming to class sick. I still, even under those circumstances, I recommend you come to class, and only because I would like to think that I would help you to learn. I still anticipate normally that if you're well, you come to class, but there's no, I will not be withdrawing anyone from class or anything like that this semester because I do not ever want to put anyone in a situation in which you have to decide whether or not you're going to get kicked out of class or you come to class sick. I do not come to class sick. It goes without saying. If you were ill, let me know. You can work something out. I'm trying to also record lectures. If you're ever in a situation where you feel ill, or even you have a suspected case in which you might be ill, it is really better to not come. And that also, of course, will hold with any evaluations you give the class, quizzes, and tests. I will have an alternative way that you can take these if you are unable to come. Academic honesty is fairly easy. I expect, of course, that exams or quizzes are your own work. The exception to that rule is the presentations people get, in which you have to collaborate with other people in your group. All right. Pages 2 on. I'm not going to go blow by blow by because those excruciatingly dull have absolutely no meaning to you right now. Needless to say, though, what I've given you here is a day-by-day breakdown of what we will do for each individual class. What is the material we're going to cover, what is the reading. On days when there's assignments, I have the assignments all there already. Days there are presentations, the presentations are all there. So in essence, you can use this as a roadmap. As I mentioned before, if I am absolutely forced to adapt this in any way, because of circumstances outside my control, I will do it, although I'll be really clumsy about it. But everything's here. The one really weird quirk this semester is that you'll notice at the very end of the semester, the final exam is actually planned to be off campus, to be online. And we'll do that through Blackboard. The other exams, if all goes as planned, will just be in class. All right, that's the plan. And I'll explain a little bit more how the Blackboard test will work in the future, but in essence, plan for that. The plan now, of course, is that we'll break before Thanksgiving and run for the hills. And then you take the exams from wherever you are. Okay, does that make sense? All right, page 7, I know people always ask about this, I just want to go over this for a moment. The question of grading. There are 5 major components of your grade. The big slice, the one we talked about, the final exam. The other 2 slices are the second and first midterm exams. Then there are quizzes, 3 quizzes, which are not really only 5% a piece. And then your oral presentations, both of which are 5% a piece. I should say, by the way, there is a method to the madness for the oral presentations. I know that everyone is always really sour about they feel that other people have been pull their weight and everything, and this will destroy my career. The reason I make oral presentations so low percentage-wise, I really do think this is a very useful exercise to do, but I don't want to penalize you for it. And because the percentage is so low, I can tell you in the past, even people who end up with the worst groups in creation, doesn't really end up impacting your grade much on the whole. Because I do want you to do this thing, even though, as I said, I realize that sometimes forced kind of control the group does not necessarily get. I get it. All right, going to some of these things in greater detail. The final and the midterms will have essays on them that will reflect both the information you learned in lecture and the reading that you've had from those 2 books I just showed you. If you attend lecture, if you do the reading, you should be able to do reasonably well on these. My exams are really not meant to sort of throw you curveballs or to be extremely difficult to do, but I do want you to show me that you can respond to my questions. You can give me good, solid information based upon things you've learned during lecture, you've done the readings. You can make sure to explain yourself carefully, give me good detail, give me accurate information. All of these things are what I'm looking for. So good, solid essay answers to my questions. The quizzes are slightly different. I want to say just a word about them too. The quizzes, you'll notice that there are 3 in the course of the semester, and there's also a section kind of like a quiz on the final exam. And these are in some ways even simpler than the midterms and the final. On the quizzes, what I will do is give you a brief excerpt from the reading, so something you've read before previously, and I'll ask you to first of all put it in your own words, and then explain what this passage has to do with history we've been learning in lecture. So in essence, to do the skills of the story. To show me that you can read carefully and put things in your own words. Show me also that you can contextualize these readings and put it into the context of the history of the learning. If you've been doing the reading, you should generally be able to do fairly well on the quizzes. It is my check to make sure you have been doing the reading. And at the very end, I'll say a little bit more about the oral presentation. What else I want to say about this? Other things on the requirements, I give out outlines. In every class after this one, I will give out outlines for lectures. The outlines are, in essence, meant as a help to you. First of all, tell you what themes I'll cover. Second of all, to give you any terms I'm going to be using that are difficult. Rather than having you run to the board every time I have to write some sort of term that you've never heard of, it's much easier for me just to put it in one place. And I also put questions on the outlines that relate back to the reading. Just to see, sometimes people find those helpful when they're reviewing the readings just to have. So those are all on the outlines. And you'll see if you go to the Blackboard site for the class, the outlines are already there. You can go and, if you want to download them, but I'll have them in hard form for future classes. For the 2 midterms, I ask that you get a blue book for each one. If you've never written an exam with a blue book, it's a great opportunity. They are sold at the grading store because it's a pop, which is really highway robbery, but I digress. As I mentioned earlier, if any emergency comes up, please, including of course anything having to do with the pandemic, but just generally, of course, God forbid some life emergency comes up or a non-COVID related illness, please get in touch with me as soon as possible. And I really, under those circumstances, of course, I'm more than happy to arrange and make up an alternative way for you to examine. I don't give extra credit assignments. If you've done the work and done it well, you don't need extra credit. The last thing I have on page 7 is really less of a requirement and more of like a wish I cast out into the universe. When I send an email, I don't generally just send emails to chat about letters. I send out emails for a purpose. And I ask you to give me the benefit of the doubt when I send an email and look at it. I don't ask that you're interested in it or you keep it even after the fact, but do read over my emails just once, just to see if there's anything in there that might be useful. All right, page 8. The last thing I'll look for, 2 more things. Accommodations, I take accommodations very seriously, but I have to know about them. So if this applies to you and you receive accommodations for other classes, please do get in touch with me privately. And that can be arranged. But as I said, please don't tell me the absolute estimate just for a quiz or something where we can arrange something. Tell me as soon as you're arranging. Page 8 and then 9. Over the years teaching this class, I have had several people ask me the question of how do I study for a quiz? How do I study for an exam? And rather than just give out all this information piecemeal as I used to do, I've given you everything right there. How to do quizzes, how to study for a quiz, how to study for an exam. So you just have all that information right there. So then you can review it ahead of time. Make sense? I'm not going to review any of that now because it really would have very little meaning now. You wouldn't remember it. But that's one of the reasons to keep the syllabus. Then when time comes, it's right there. All right? All right. I could speak more. Heaven's like, well, oh, sorry. Before I open the floor to questions. The other thing I just want to very quickly touch on is presentations. With the presentations, because because of the difficulties involved in the pandemic, I'm not supposed to be passing things around. This semester, what I've done is I've just automatically assigned all of you groups completely randomly by your alphabetical order, in essence. And I've decided I just posted those lists on the Blackboard site for the class. So you're all in groups already. If, and this is a big if you know already that there is something important that will make it impossible for you to be in class on that day, get in touch with me as soon as possible, and I will switch up groups. And of course, it would apply to anything having to do with sickness or quarantine. That goes without saying. Everyone will be either in a group or if push comes to shove at the last minute, I can always find an alternative sign or something for you to do to get that percentage visualized. But let me know if you can't. But otherwise, as I said, I've just taken the liberty of putting them into groups, which makes it a lot easier in these circumstances. What the groups are is very simple. Each group will be assigned one specific text, starting with next Friday on the Epic of Gilgamesh. Let's see, my own schedule. Yes, Friday, August the 28th, the Epic of Gilgamesh. I should say, by the way, that even if you're randomly assigned to the first group, many people in the past have thanked me for being in the first group because you get it out of the way. In all your rest of your classes, there's basically very little going on, where there's a minimum amount of work. So there is actually a benefit to being in an early group. what I will do for these presentations is simple. I will turn over the classroom to the group. I will ask you to do two things. First of all, I'll ask you to give a summary of the most important parts of the source. And secondly, I'm going to ask you then to tell me, what does this source tell me about the civilization? So for the epic of Gilgamesh, the ancient Near East, what can you learn about it? What can you learn about how those people thought, what they believed in, their religion? Can it tell us about what sort of buildings they had, their physical culture? Can it tell us about their social life, the roles of men and women? Anything you can squeeze out of the source. So you're doing the work of historian. Each group has 6 people. You can divide the work as you choose among different people. Everyone has to speak at some point, so that we don't just hang back and doing no work at all. Then I normally ask groups to speak for around between 40, at most 45 minutes, to leave some time for questions. The questions can be helpful, first of all, for everyone in the audience, that you were able to ask questions about things that confused you. Secondly, if I notice that there's something you didn't bring up, but I think you should bring up, that you missed in the presentation, the questions can actually give you the opportunity to ask those questions. So it actually helps you, ultimately. After you give a presentation, then I send an email to the group, and telling you what you did right, what you did wrong, and give you your grade. Make sense? All right. Now that truly was my entire spiel. Are there questions about the syllabus or the course? Please.
With the presentations, where do we find out what reading our group has?
You can go immediately, if you go to the Blackboard site for the class, you'll see what I have is a presentation group folder, and you'll see for each group, you'll be reading and then reading. So you can do it as soon as you get on the internet. Yeah. Please.
I don't have my books yet. Do you know if I can get them like online?
Email me privately. I may or may not have a legal copy that I can forward you for the time being.
Thank you.
Don't spread that around. Okay. Other questions? About either the syllabus or go ahead.
The new books, you said we're supposed to be using new books for midterms and exams.
Correct.
I take it they're essay exams, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I get this problem every time. Everybody's definition of an essay seems to be different nowadays. How long is an essay for you?
That was a good question. What I usually tell people is that I never count lines when it comes to essays. It's not just, because in the past what I've seen is some people can write for pages and say absolutely nothing or repeat themselves over and over again. I'm not going to give you more points just because you made the same point 3 times. So I've seen some very essays that pack a lot in a very short amount of time. What I'm looking for is, first of all, do you answer the question I posed to you? Do you give good detail? Do you explain things carefully? Do you give me good examples? And that's what I'm primarily interested in. So at the end of the day, you should ask yourself, did I answer this question and answer this as fully as I possibly could? And that, frankly, is much more important to me than just a sheer question bank. If you know information, there's no reason to hide it. And sometimes I think that students, it's the strangest thing, people actually know things they choose not to write on exams, and afterwards you talk to them, like, they actually knew the point you raised. There really is not time to be bashful on exams. I mean, if you have information that's relevant and accurate, give it to me. There's no reason to hold back if you do have information. Other questions? Two very quick points, and we'll close. First is just a point of terminology that will come up again and again. I'll review this in the first lecture, but better to know it immediately, because I will use this a lot. And this is the difference between primary and secondary sources. When it comes to the study of history, there are 2 basic kinds of sources that historians rely on. The one that is by far the most important of the two are known as primary sources. And what primary sources are any material produced by the past civilization, produced by the civilization we are studying. These can involve both written sources or non-written physical sources. You'll see that the way that this course was designed, I really going out of my way to try to give you as many primary sources as possible. You will read at home a lot of primary sources. Then as part of lectures, I will then give you images to show you some of the physical structures that we're talking about, physical objects that we're talking about in the past as well. But this term will come up a lot. It's sort of the way that the courses are developed here in the history department. I really want you to be engaging a lot with primary sources. The other kind of sources historians refer to are secondary sources. When a historian, a modern historian, has a question about the past, you first of all make sure to examine the primary sources, and then you produce an answer essentially to that question in the form of an article or a book. And this, in essence, is a secondary source. So it's already a certain amount of remove from the past, and it's someone who has analyzed the primary sources to produce an answer. So, for instance, the lectures are, in essence, are a secondary source in this class, or any other sort of books you might read by a modern historian. To be well-informed historian, I have to use both of these, because I both want to make sure that I understand the material that comes from the past, and at the same time, I want to make sure I'm in conversation with other historians. It doesn't make sense, for instance, for me to answer the same exact question that's already been answered before and very well. That would be just duplicated research. I want to make sure, even if I'm working on a similar topic, that I've read all other people who are working on this. Does this make sense? Mm-hmm. Last question, before I let you go. And this question is a big question that I'll only half answer. The question is, why study history? Why are you here? Who cares anyway? To get some sense, I think, of why you should study history, what I first ask you to imagine is a person who all of a sudden has lost all of their memory, all the people that they knew, the experiences that they had, even the places that are around them. I would ask you to think about how that person, yes, the person has lost memory, but more than that, they've lost their identity, who they are. At least one way to think about history is another kind of memory, but not the memory of just one person, the collective memory, the memory of an entire civilization. And if we choose to simply ignore history or we never learned it at all, to some degree, it's very similar to that person who has no identity at all. Part of our identity is built on things that happened in the past. On top of that, I would also say, or rather optimistically, that especially, again, we're talking a lot of civilizations that continue to be important in the modern day era, like China, for instance, in this class. For us to not only understand ourselves, but understand other people, it's necessary to have some idea of their history, of their identity. And I think it provides a very valuable guide to interacting with others outside of our own cultural sphere. It has some idea of what they consider to be important about the past, where they felt that they came from, in essence. Some people will argue, and they clearly have argued to me in the past, that they see the point of studying history, but not necessarily going back as far as we're doing in this class. But the only response I can give to this question is that many of the institutions that you interact with, sometimes on a day-to-day basis, have far deeper roots than just a few years ago. If you were to study something like the world economy, for instance, and you were only to go 50 years back, you might say, well, you really don't even know the obvious basics of the subject. Something like, for instance, the US government, you chose to only go back a century to study it, you would miss some of the foundational moments of its coming into being. When it comes to something like the Catholic Church, even if you go back a millennium, I would argue that that is not enough really to understand some of the most basic things about it. For things like that, you have to dig a little bit deeper and go further in the past. Even if not everything we're going to study has an obvious sort of modern relevance, it can still help you get into the frame of mind to see how things change over time and develop. In this course in particular, I think that the other thing that is sometimes very difficult for students to wrap their head around, again, this is a course that is very much not specialized. This is a large survey class. And some people also don't necessarily see the benefit of that. I mean, why not take, for instance, a course just in nature? The answer to that question is that, I mean, well, we do have courses on nature and other things like that. I hope you do take them in the future. But even if you don't, I think that a survey course does have its place. If you're taking a very specialized course, it's very easy to lose sight of the whole. How do different civilizations fit together with one another? How does one civilization influence the next? How can sometimes the influence of a civilization centuries later still have relevance? You know, Arabic thinkers, for instance, still talking about classical Greek thought centuries down the line. Those connections are much harder to see unless you have a framework to put them into. And a course like this can provide that for you. It certainly does not provide the detail, but it does provide a very big framework to put all these civilizations in the ancient medieval past together. And again, that is not to, big history of this kind is not to knock history in many other varieties. We will interact with history on a very daily basis. And in some cases, that history is very small and intimate. I mean, each family has a history. And of course, there's national history, which hopefully it's something in the past you've studied. But I would argue that this kind of history at the scale, the global scale, is one that is very well suited to our day and age together. This idea of globalization, in which this really is a very intensified series of links that exist around the world today between different civilizations. This is history really for this era of time. And for that reason, I hope it is useful. Now, I know in the past, sometimes students have said to me things like, well, listen, I don't want to study about, Islam. Muslims are my enemy. Well, I hope you don't feel that way. But even if you do, I mean, my argument to that student was very simple, that even if you feel that Muslims are your enemy, would you rather live in ignorance of your enemy or anything that moved or motivated that person? Wouldn't you want to learn about them? And it seems to me to make a whole lot more sense, even if that's your only view of Islam. To what end? What do I think this course will produce? I know probably all of you at some point have heard the statement about, those who do not know history doomed to repeat it. This is a bit of a simplification, I've always felt, because really, there's no way always to predict human behavior. In fact, things that happened in the past do never actually replicate themselves 100%. That just simply doesn't happen. However, history can serve as a valuable guide to us as we're thinking about the future. Give us some idea when civilizations were posed with big problems, how did they deal with them? How in some cases they failed to deal with them? People evaluating things ahead of them. It can be very useful to have past as that guide to say, okay, well, what are my options? How do things work out for people in the past? And in that way, I do think history can be very useful. There's also, though, a completely non-utilitarian way to view this, which is to say that there is delight, joy, I may even say, in learning about the people who came before us. What were their lives like? To the degree that we can reconstruct them. Maybe it's nice to see your humanity reflecting people, of course, who are long dead, but who also had their own lives. Ultimately, I do think too that learning about all these different beliefs, customs, events of the past can broaden our sense of what is possible for humans, and perhaps also how we fit into that larger progression. All of those things, I think, can lead to history. But again, you can be the judges of whether or not I do that or not in the course of the semester. All right. I got you out a few minutes early. If you have any questions or anything, I'll be here. Otherwise, I will see you folks on Friday. Thank you.
I don't, we were gonna look at this Wednesday schedule change, and they're gonna be here on the 26th or something like that.
Okay,
Or maybe-
if it's possible, email me, I can always,
Oh, really? Yeah. I don't even know if this is. I think I'm gonna make it this week.
Oh, no, yeah, you should, with these departure times.
Yeah.
Friday, October 9th, you may have to run, but otherwise,
Yeah.
I think you're good, but.
Okay. All right, thank you. Awesome. Same thing here.
Oh.
My name's Maggie. Yeah, but I think it'll just be the very last one. It's the only one that's.
Oh, yeah, great.
It's not any presentation days either, so. That's
Perfect, okay, great, yeah, go.
Awesome,
Okay.
thank you.